sorry. She holds a BA and an MA in English and has taught English on both the college and high school levels. She currently leads book talks in Phoenix, Arizona, where she lives with her husband. I'm going to now turn it over to Ruth, and I'm going to spotlight Ruth. And
oh my God, that's too scary.
Oh, it's not so scary. Okay, Ruth, you can take it over now.
Okay, well, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming. And I want to thank Smile on Seniors, a wonderful organization, and Rabbi Levitov for having me. My book, this is the book. It's called Escaping the Whale. It's a novel. The subtitle is The Holocaust is Over, but is it ever over for the next generation? So that tells you a little bit about what it deals with. Now, I don't know how many of you have read it or not read it. I'm going to assume we have a mix of both. So I'll just briefly tell you a little bit about the story without giving away too many spoilers. When I first started to write it, my concern was the character. The first thing that came to me was the character. I didn't set out to, create a manifesto or make any point or, teach anything. I started out, a character came to me. Now, this character is named Marsha Gold. She is a 28-year-old New Yorker living in Brooklyn, which is where I grew up. And she is a guidance counselor at a large high school. And there have been many teenage pregnancies at the school recently, so they made her, since she's the only woman guidance counselor, they made her the specialist. The men didn't want to deal with these pregnant girls. They sent them all to her, so that became her specialty. I did teach in a large Brooklyn high school for several years, 4 years, but I taught English. My character had taught social studies, history, and then became a guidance counselor. So I know the environment, but I made up her actual story. Now, in the book, she is a child of Holocaust survivors. I had no doubt in my mind when I started that my character would be that. It just was natural to me. People ask me, when did you know that your parents were survivors? I always knew. I don't remember it being told. I knew that my whole family had been refugees. They got out of Vienna, Austria, after 1938, after the Anschluss. And I just always knew. So it was part of who I was. And, my whole family, it was part of who everybody was. I was the first generation to be born in this country. And so she is struggling with her legacy of inherited trauma. She has taken on some of, the fears and delusions and exaggerated a lot of them. And it takes place in 1980. If you remember, that's when the Iranian hostage crisis was in the news. And she reacts very strongly to the news about the hostage crisis because of her problems dealing with her legacy. Her family thinks she's got it made, a good job, a boyfriend that they approve of, but she's really miserable because she has all kinds of delusions and fears. She imagines there are animals in her closet, and she has all kinds of problems. Her mental health is really in question. And as the story progresses, a lot of crises come up in her personal life, in work, in the world with the crisis. And after a while, she can't keep up her facade anymore. She reaches a breaking point and feels she has to get away. She has to escape her life. And that's really what the story is about. I'm not going to give away anything, but she thinks if she just gets away, that will solve everything. And she has to find out that there's more involved to being an adult and solving your issues. I started this book, I was living in New Jersey, home with children. I had always been a freelance writer, and I wanted to do a novel, and I was stuck. The ideas would come to me and then they didn't go anywhere. I'd start something and feel like I got bored with it. I heard about a writing class they were doing in the adult education program at the local high school. I said, you know what, I'm gonna give it a try. I went, and the first prompt, the first exercise that this teacher gave us, is going to sound so corny and hokey, but it worked for me. She said to us, close your eyes, imagine you're fishing in a lake, and you throw out the line and you bring in a fish, and you look at it and you go, I don't like this fish. You throw it back. Keep doing that until you find a fish that you go, this is my fish. And in my mind, I did that, and lo and behold, my character was the fish. It came to me as Marsha Gold is my story. This is my fish. I'm going to have this character who's dealing with her parents' experiences and legacy and everything she knows about the Holocaust, and trying to live a normal life and try to conceal that part of her that's tormenting her. So that was how I started, and I worked on it and I wrote it. And then in the middle of working on it, I suddenly got hit with another idea, a completely different idea, a love story. I abandoned this novel and I wrote this other book. Years of working on that book, getting it reviewed and workshopped and critiqued and revised again. And I got an agent for that other book from a big house, and she loved it. She was going to sell it to some big, agency. 3 years, she couldn't sell it. We parted ways. I went back to this one thinking, let me see if I could get the passion for it back. And I did. And I threw myself into it. I was totally involved with it. When I originally tried to sell it, I was told, yes, we like it, but it won't sell because it can't fit neatly into any category. There's no category for it. The salespeople in the companies, they didn't want to touch it. They said, there's no category. Okay, I put it aside. After moving to Arizona, I became involved with the Phoenix Holocaust Association. I give talks for them, and my sister's very involved also. And I met many other children of survivors, which was a very worthwhile experience. And that kind of got me involved in trying again to get this book published. And I did. There was a publisher in Europe, actually, who's specializing in Holocaust stories, mostly memoirs. I told her this is not a memoir. She said, I'll take a look at it anyway. And she said, I want it. I will publish it. So that's how this came to be. Now, okay. One of the things that I realized as I was writing, I started out with this character, like as she grew in my mind, okay? All I knew at the beginning, what her job was going to be. She was going to have a boyfriend. Even that was a facade, the boyfriend, because she really was not that happy with him. How could she? Him, he was the one everyone approved of. So eventually she became more of a character to me. Now, in writing the book, I realized that I could bring in many other topics that I care about. And these are some of the things I dealt with. First of all, there's the Holocaust itself. I don't really get into that. Just little hints here and there. I feel sometimes less is more. Little, just, things that her parents mentioned, things that she heard about. They just take root in her mind. She's so susceptible to these kind of stories. But we know, so it's just knowing how horrible that was. Then the experience for children of survivors. Now, this has been a subject largely overlooked in literature, especially in fiction, which is why I was told, there's no category for it. In the late 70s, an author named Helen Epstein, who's still around, wrote a book called Children of the Holocaust. It was a nonfiction, and this really influenced me. It was a study of descendants to, the next generation, the second generation, and the different ways that they reacted to knowing about their parents. And what she really pointed out was that there were several extremes, obviously. There were parents who talked about their experiences constantly and made everybody crazy, just constantly talking about it. There were parents who would not speak of it at all. They wouldn't answer questions. Even to the extreme, there were parents who denied that they were Jewish. When my sister and two cousins and I went to Vienna last year as part of a program called the Jewish Welcome Service that welcomes a second generation back to Vienna, it was interesting, we met a woman who had told us that she grew up thinking she was Christian. And on her deathbed, her mother told her that they were Jewish, but they just could never get over the fear of what they went through because they were Jewish, even in the United States. So they never told her she was Jewish. And I said, did you have family here? She goes, yes, we had cousins. They were Jewish, but she never thought anything of that. It never occurred to her that she also was Jewish. And you hear that. There were other stories. Another book was just published of a woman who found out her parents had lied to them for years. They told them they were Catholic. And when she found out they were Jewish, the mother was furious and her wouldn't speak to her. So there are stories. There are things like that going on. So those are the two extremes. I was lucky. My parents were not either extreme. They were content, intent on building a life, raising their family in America. They, learned English. I mean, they did everything. They never denied what happened. If you asked a question, they answered it. Occasionally, when they were with family, a reference would come up. They'd throw it out. But there was nothing extreme about it. I was really lucky that way. Now, part of the problem that I've noticed with, the other survivors I've talked with is this, it's really an immigrant problem. And people feel like their parents went through so much to come here and build them a life. They have to live their lives the way the parents want. They have to do what they want. If they don't, there'll be all this guilt. My parents made all these sacrifices. I have heard from readers from Chinese background and Indian background who said that they related to my character because their parents were immigrants and they felt that same pressure to live exactly the way, they were expected to. Now, a lot of the children of survivors have kind of created in their minds associations that remind them of the Holocaust and they won't go near it. And I mentioned that in the book. Some people will never wear stripes. That's it, especially vertical stripes. There's too much of a bad association with that. Someone told me she'll never wear, tall black boots. Some people will never go in a closed environment where they feel they're trapped, like an elevator or I don't know, like even when you go for an MRI, and you're in that close, people freak out. And a lot of it is that fear of being trapped, being in a subway car, any kind of train. This is a very typical reaction for, survivors and for the children that took that on. I don't know if this is related to that, but when I was in college, I remember I was so happy that you didn't have assigned seats in classes. You could sit where you wanted, whereas high school, they usually assign your seat. I would always try to sit near the back by a door. I always felt like I'm safer there. I can get out quickly if I have to. I don't know what this is related to, but I think it is related to feeling I have to be safe. I have to be able to get out. I have a friend of mine who always makes sure her papers are in order. Her passport is always current just in case I have to quickly escape. I think that is a big issue with children of survivors. And I think another thing I was interested in is how their experiences causes them to react to other horrors. In my book, these other horrors become the hostage crisis in Iran. She just overreacts and takes in all the horrible things she's hearing. It's a reminder of how horrible people can be to each other and what kind of things can happen in the world. A news story could set you off, or something she sees. She sees a cucumber being cut. She thinks of an arm being cut off. I mean, she's bordering on mental illness. That's really the question, and it becomes more and more. Her obsessive thinking. This is a problem of obsession. And what's the line between mental health and normalcy? She's clearly, dangling on that line, this character. Another issue I was always very concerned about was the teaching of history. Now, even though I didn't teach history, I always felt that it's a really problematic subject to teach. You could learn about some war going to school in, France, and then you go to school in England and learn about the same war, and all of a sudden there's a whole different angle. I think the teaching of the Holocaust is very difficult. I know the Phoenix Holocaust Association is working very hard on getting Holocaust education into the curriculum in Arizona. It's a state-by-state thing. Some schools mandate it and some don't. A lot depends on whoever the teacher is, if they want to get into that and how they want to present it. Other things come up in the book, the Vietnam War, the hostage crisis, which is ongoing at the time. In the book, she has an incident where she's helping her niece with a project on Alexander the Great, and this little girl, not so little, she's smart, she realizes that, they're being presented a biased view. There's no such thing as an unbiased view, really. It's very difficult in history. The teaching of Columbus has been adjusted to new realizations. It's just very hard. The teaching of history, I think, is very problematic. Another issue that comes up in the book that concerns me is teen pregnancy. My own exposure to it was when I was teaching in this high school in Brooklyn during a summer session with kids from other schools. It wasn't all boys school, so teen pregnancy at the beginning was not a problem. But kids from other schools came in the summer, and there was one girl who was very pregnant. She must have been like 8.5 months pregnant. And she was just walking around going to classes to this summer program. And the men teachers there were horrible. They were not to her, I never saw that, but just in talking about her, they were very snide and obviously uncomfortable and very, contemptuous of this girl. And that really disturbed me, not to give her a chance. She was going to school, whatever happened, we don't know. And I thought, gee, if it were more common and the school had to really deal with it, they couldn't continue with just having that kind of attitude. And then when I was living in New Jersey, I signed up to be a home instructor. Kids who had to be out of school for a while in high school, they had tutors in various subjects coming to their homes. Of course, I had the usual broken leg and whatever, and kids suspended for selling drugs. But most of the ones I had were girls who were pregnant. And I never knew if it was their decision or their parents' decision to take them out of school, or if the school wanted them on home instruction, didn't want them parading around, giving ideas, I don't know. But that was my exposure. And it was all types of girls. That's what amazed me. I mean, some, you could have the stereotype of, who would get pregnant in high school, trying whatever to hold on to the boyfriend or whatever. But some of them were really smart and were planning to go to college, and there was just a range of types of people. So that was an eye-opener for me. Another issue that I bring up in the book that has always concerned me is teen suicide. People are terrified of that subject. No one knows what to do about it. That's the thing. School administrators, teachers, parents, it's a frightening, frightening subject. And in the book, there is a case of that, and my main character does feel guilt that she didn't pick up on it. She felt connected to this girl and knew that she was troubled, and of course she feels guilty. But this is a character who's going to feel guilty about just about anything. That's another problem of second generation. I think guilt is a very big issue for this generation. Another thing I deal with is the problems for women. Now, this is a problem that could be for men too, but I think especially for women, especially at that time, there was an issue. How do you stand up for yourself and be true to yourself and still be in a relationship? Now, Marsha struggles with this with her boyfriend. He is, very opinionated and whatever, and she knows he's a good catch, so to speak, but can you still be independent and be in a relationship? I think that is a very big question that especially women deal with, and my protagonist does struggle with that. Setting boundaries in life, that's connected to this question. How do you set boundaries with people? Growing up means standing up for yourself, being true to yourself, respecting yourself, and not prioritizing what other people want for you. And that's very, very difficult, I think, for second generation people. You're going to feel guilty if you don't do what other people want. And this is a big question for my protagonist. She has to grow up. And I think it's a maturing process, is to learn who you are. Two motives in the book were very important to me that I pursue. One is the animal motif, and the other is the sea, water, ocean motif. Now, animal motif, I'm very intrigued by what animals represent to us. I've been asked about my title. How did I come up with Escaping the Whale? I'm going to leave it up to each reader to decide what they feel that title means. I will tell you that there's a common association to whales. The first is always the Jonah and the whale story. Now, Jonah was swallowed by this whale, we're led to believe, as a kind of punishment, because he didn't listen to what God told him to do. I think of it more as a timeout. He had time to meditate. 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, he got to think about what he had done and how he had rejected his mission. And inside the whale, he's living in darkness, remember? So that's sort of like a pre-birth situation, like being inside a womb. And then when the whale spits him back out, he's reborn. He's been in the water in the whale's belly, and now he's a different person, and he recognizes what he has to do. So I think that whale story can be interpreted as a kind of journey to, figure out who you are and be reborn. What's not in the book, I don't mention Moby Dick, but many people have said to me that was right away an association they made. And in Moby Dick, the whale is a terrible force of destruction, and it cannot be defeated by a man who thinks he can defeat it, and he can't. And we kind of take out the message that man has to fear and respect nature. An animal represents nature, and in nature there are the positive, nurturing aspects and the destructive aspects. In Moby Dick, nature is destructive. The whale is destructive. And that's an important point to recognize, the mysteriousness of nature. All through myths, water is a very important element in myths and religions, stories, creation stories. Very often, everything's born out of the water, the Greek myths, Babylonian myths. Dragons in myths is a form of an animal. Again, that's mysterious. You don't know, it's just frightening. And someone has to kill, some hero has to come up, kill the dragon or kill the evil animal to save other people. You could look at, the serpent in the Bible. You could look at the wolf in Little Red Riding Hood, or the wolf in the Three Little Pigs. There's an evil in them, and the man has to, the human, which is usually a man, has to overcome that animal to save everything. And of course, psychiatrists, psychologists analyze that as the hero has to take on some element of the animal in his system. He has to recognize that evil and destructive force is part of him too, to be a complete human being. In primitive societies, when hunters kill an animal, they eat its heart. And that's a way to absorb its strength and its spirit, and a way of recognizing the animal in our own nature instead of rejecting it. The other motif that was very important to me, and again, I didn't plan this, I just saw when I was writing the book, like, wow, I have a lot of stuff in here about water and oceans. I think it was Jung who said that the ocean represents the subconscious because it's mysterious, it's deep, it's dark. We can't go down there. We don't know, we don't know what creatures are in there that are scary. I have Marsha in the book visiting a resort town in Mexico and being right on the ocean. And she has a dream about, dangerous animals coming out of there. She sees a surfer and she's imagining what happens if he drowns. So the ocean takes on that element of danger, okay? Again, even our story of the flood is the example of the destructive power of water. Water can destroy, and then it also gives life. The ancients knew that water was life. They didn't have the science we have to know that that was scientifically based, but they just instinctively knew that water is life. So it's life and it's destruction. And I think that's a very interesting dichotomy. You could think back to stories you read in high school, the Odyssey, okay? Odysseus is fighting the war for 10 years. Then to get back home, he spends another 10 years journeying over water to get back home. And in the course of his journey, he has to fight all kinds of, evil forces and dragons that are trying to, kill him. But when he can finally get home after this 10-year water journey, he's ready to settle down, to be a man, to be a king and a husband and a father. So we have to, I think, see that element of the water journey being significant. The ocean especially plays a very important role. And in fact, the Legends of Gilgamesh, I don't know if any of you had to learn that in school, it's a Mesopotamian myth, very similar to Noah and the flood. He's a king and he's a selfish brute. And he decides he wants to live forever. after his best friend, he had one best friend that he cared about, and he was killed. That was like the gods were going to teach him a lesson. They took away the one person he cared about. So he heard there's a man that has lived forever. The gods granted him eternal life. He wants to find him. The journey to the man involves going through darkness. Again, darkness is like the womb, going over water. A ferryman has to take him there. And it turns out this man is like their version of Noah. He had lived through the flood. The gods told him to build a boat. They saved his family and animals. And after the flood, the gods promised they're never going to destroy the world again by water. And they grant him eternal life. That part was different. But it's the same idea of, he finds out after this journey over water, Gilgamesh, that he's not going to become immortal. It's not going to happen. But he's now content with his life and proud of his achievements, and he becomes a good king instead of a nasty king. He's been reborn through darkness and water. And I think people are fascinated by the ocean. Even if they don't swim, they sit there and stare at the waves. There is something about it. And I think in this book, it became something. I looked at it and said, gee, this is something in this book that I didn't even realize I was dealing with. As far as fairy tales, I think of the one about the frog and the princess, where this princess loses her ball in the well, and a frog comes out of the well and gives it back to her, but makes all kinds of deals. She has to take him home. He has just to eat with her, whatever. And he's slimy and repulsive, the frog. She's like, ugh. But later he turns into the handsome prince. So I think that kind of says he came out of the well. He was repulsive and ugly, and he became handsome and beautiful. Both beauty and ugliness from the water, from being born. And we are both, we have both in us. In our own religion, the mikveh is a purifying act, the recognition that water purifies. In Christianity, the baptism is being reborn. So water is very, very important. And I think my title implies that there's something in this story. What she's escaping from, can she escape? What does the whale represent? That's really going to be for everybody to say. So that's really what I was going to present. I could look at the questions if people have questions about it. What did I just do?
Okay, Ruth.
Wait, I lost. Yeah, I'm coming back.
Before I open up everything to questions and unmute your microphones, first of all, I want to thank you very much. I must be honest, I have not read your book, but one of the things that you touched upon in the book is you, as a survivor of a Holocaust survivor. I am not a survivor. My parents were not, they had left Poland before the war. But do you feel that like you said, people don't want to wear stripes or black boots? For me, I've had that experience when I flew Lufthansa the first time and the last time. And when I sat down in the seat and the air conditioning came on, I had this thing go through me that I was in a gas chamber. I've never ever flown Lufthansa. So you feel that if your parents were involved, that these things follow down to the children? These feelings, or do you think they just lost?
I think that's part of being Jewish, even if you weren't directly related to someone who was caught in the Holocaust. I think just knowing about it, being educated about it, because, we could hear about the horrors of, the Civil War, let's say, or the French Revolution, and we're like, yeah, that was terrible, but it doesn't affect us. The Holocaust, every time I hear a story, I feel like that could have been me. What was that? There by the grace of God go I. That was us. That was our people. And I think even if you are completely American, but if you're Jewish and you have some knowledge about this, I think that's a typical reaction, what you said about Lufthansa. I remember when I got to Vienna, and it was my first time there, I knew some German words here and there. My parents would throw it out, but they spoke English. What was my exposure to hearing German? It was, all these movies where the bad guys were talking German. Here I'm walking around on the street and cute little kids are talking German. It was such like an awakening, like, oh my goodness, it's a real language and these are modern day people. So I think just being Jewish gives us those associations and fears. We just can't get away from it.
Okay. I don't see any questions in the chat.
Yeah, I have them.
I'll unmute you all.
Yeah, they're on now. What happened to them? Oh, there were a bunch. No, I can't.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions for Ruth?
Oh, there were a bunch, and I don't know. Maybe I just automatically deleted them.
Linda.
Yeah, Linda.
Linda, go. Unmute your mic, Linda. Unmute your mic. There. Oh, unmute.
Unmute in the corner, upper right-hand corner, I think.
Can't hear you.
What I did. Oh,
There
no?
you go.
There we go.
Okay.
I hope I remember my question. Actually, it was more of a comment. I was thinking about the whale, and I thought of it as just a kind of an image of the whole Nazi situation in Europe for Jews, that it's this overpowering, huge thing, and that's how I thought of it anyway.
Okay.
I just wanted to share that. And I also wondered, did you write the poetry for the girl who committed suicide?
I did.
Very nice. You really got into her character.
Okay, I see a question from Rabbi Levitov. What would be another example of inherited trauma? Wait, there was more to it.
By community.
For the community. I think fear and suspicion is an example. I see so many people, either who were survivors or their parents were, of course it's natural to only hang out with people who are similar to you. That's natural. But to go to the point of being suspicious of anyone who's not from your background or not from your culture. I think I was, again, very fortunate in my upbringing because both my parents, in their escape, they escaped separately. They didn't meet till they came to New York. Both of them, their escapes from Europe were helped tremendously by non-Jews. Both were, my father was hidden in an apartment of a non-Jewish neighbor. My mother was helped in France as well as in Luxembourg. Someone took her on the train to France with her daughter's passport, risking her own life. These were all non-Jewish people that helped. So I never really was raised to feel suspicious of people who were different. I felt, they could be good or they could not be good. It's possible either way. So I think those suspicion and fear of the other, unfortunately, is right. And Linda just mentioned the Righteous Gentiles. There are many. They're out there. And I have heard stories of people and their parents being saved in one way or another, and helped along the way. You just have to judge each person on their own. And I think that the fear and suspicion is a major problem for the Jewish community now, that we shouldn't feel that way. We need to feel that we're part of the world and the larger community. That's my feeling. There were others. Let me see if I can get them. I don't know what happens when I click on chat, they go away. Oh, here, okay. Okay, I think I just answered Rabbi Levitov's question. Yes, I'm being thanked that, for the taboo subjects that I've inherited. Are there other religions or demographics or communities that experience inherited traumas like Jews? Yes, as I've mentioned, I've heard from Chinese people and Indians where their parents were, or they themselves as well, were recent immigrants. in fact, it's funny because when my son was in high school, senior in high school, there was an Indian girl who was, very bright in all the honors classes, and she was seeing one of his friends, a Jewish guy, and they had to hide it from her parents. Her parents would have been very upset that he was not Indian. And eventually they broke up, and later he found out that she married an Indian that was set up for her. I mean, she has a career in math and whatever, but it was she went along with her parents wanting her and to set up a marriage. So I think the Indian immigrants and Chinese immigrants I have seen deal with that quite a lot. Let me see, would you consider?
Yeah.
Oh, I see. I thought it was interesting that you used the backdrop of the Iranian hostage crisis. Do you identify with how Marsha reacted to it? I have a very vivid memory of that period of time. I was very struck by the way that story of the hostage crisis shocked everybody. I think it was the first time many people saw our country as vulnerable. Like we're not, invulnerable. Something could happen to us, to these Americans. And I remember that feeling of being obsessed with it. Like, I'm not one to run and turn on the TV all the time, but I always wanted to hear the news. What happened? Did anything happen with them? Any minute you expect they're going to parade them out and shoot them. There was just this fear and this sense that how could this happen to Americans? And I think that I connected that with her general sense of fear and trauma that's always in her mind, that something bad can always happen. And I think that's a second generation thing too, like, oh, somebody's late. Oh my God, something must have happened. They didn't call. I think that is part of it too. I have noticed that in my family also. So that's, I think the hostage crisis somehow, to my mind, connected to this, because I vividly remember living through that period and feeling very scared. Like what's going to happen now? And then with the helicopter rescue, oh my God, people went nuts. So I think that connected to me with horrible things going in that category. Okay. Are there any other questions?
No.
Or comments? The book is available, by the way, on Kindle as well as in book form. It's a soft cover. I wouldn't call it a paperback because it's large. It's a large soft cover, but it is coming out in hardcover as well. So, here I have a question. Okay, well, it says privately, but I think I can answer that. Did my parents speak Yiddish or any other language? Did they feel safe? My parents spoke mostly English. Here and there, there'd be some Yiddish or some German. My mother said she never even knew Yiddish until she came to New York and started working at the Diamond Line. In Vienna, they spoke German. They were Viennese. I have been told by someone, I don't know if this is true, that someone I know who travels to Germany and Austria, she said she speaks Yiddish, a kind of Yiddishized German. And in Germany, they don't understand her, but in Austria, they do. So maybe there's something more similar to Yiddish in the Austrian, Austrian version of German, Austrian dialect. French, both my parents speak French. My mother lived for 3 years in France when she got out of Austria. They tried to get across the border in Luxembourg. And then she was taken by this Christian friend of a cousin, I think it was, or a friend of a friend, who took her to France on a train with a false passport. And she lived in France for 3 years, I think it was. And then when the Germans were ready to invade Paris, they fled south and ended up in Marseille. So yes, she speaks French. My father was at the university, and he was actually a language major. And he was fluent in French also. And later went back to college after he retired and majored in Hebrew, and he was fluent in Hebrew as well. He loved Hebrew. Let me see what other.
Ruth, I have a question here. It said, where did that go? Would you consider what's going on with the Black community and other people of color an inherited trauma, fear of the police, etc.?
It's definitely a trauma. it's actually more than inherited trauma, because it started with slavery and the Reformation period and the Jim Crow period, and I think it never really ended for them. Many Jews have expressed concern that, Black Lives Matter sometimes seemed anti-Semitic, and in France they were yelling something about that. It's sad because we've been very involved in the civil rights movement, and I think that we have to be very understanding. When I was teaching at this school, which was a specialized school, the kids had to pass a test to get into it. Black students always tell me how they would be pulled over in a car. They would be, frisked and stuff. And I don't know if the white students understood, but sometimes they would be with white students, but they'd be the ones pulled out. So it's true that there is both a combination of an inherited trauma and trauma that they are personally experiencing. It's a very tough time now for all minority groups. I think minority groups have to kind of show that we understand each other.
Yes.
What is her list?
There was a question here from Lee. It was interesting that you told her plant that you haven't got a chance. I'm not nurturing. Yes, she's counseled her tears with such compassion.
Okay, yes, that's true. I think she saw the idea of this guy bringing the plant in as if saying, oh, you are the woman, you have to take care of it. You're the one that can take care of it. Or, I'm assigning you to take care of it. It's your job. I think that's what she resented. And I know I'm terrible with plants. I kill them all. So I related to that. My mother is wonderful with plants, and she is here. Mom, where are you? I could introduce her.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, she's down this way. There you are. No, where'd she go? Oh, here we go, Esther. Esther is my mother, and hi. And she is about to be 96 in July, and she enjoys the Smile on Seniors program. She used to go on Friday nights. Unfortunately, they have to put that off now. We still hear stories. Our family story was written up by my sister and my cousin. And then my sister's daughter kind of took over and added pictures and made it, more up to date. And it was interesting because one of the questions that my niece asked my mother when she was redoing the story was, when you finally got to the United States, when you got off that boat and landed here, did you feel like relief? And my mother's answer was, that was the first time I was really scared. All this time through, Europe, and knowing they didn't know what's going to happen to them. Are they going to escape the Nazis? The Nazis were rounding up people in France. Everyone was trying to get out of there, get to the United States. There was this constant, activity and tension and busyness. But once she got to the United States, now she was scared. What's going to happen now? Which is interesting because my niece expected her to say, oh yeah, that's when I felt great. But we are here. We have each other now.
Thank you. I just want to remind everybody that Friday we have a presentation of Oryx Matters. And if you'd like to know where Rabbi Levi is, he's on this plane going over the Great Lakes. And you can see his picture there with his cowboy mask. Rabbi Levi, wave to everybody. The magic of technology. At the moment, he's 37,000 feet in the air, flying at 500 miles per hour.
Wow.
He'll be down soon. Okay. Are there any other questions? You're all unmuted.
Let's see. I see someone mentioned, when we were talking about, how does it affect the community, thinking the worst, anything that happens, they're coming to get us. Yes, I think I've heard that recently, people saying, with the tension in the country now, people have been saying, we're going to be next, And it's a scary feeling. And I think what's even more scary is when minorities turn against each other. I remember a line from the autobiography of Malcolm X, where he said, the Jews are okay with us, they're fine, but it works for them if we're being persecuted, because if it wasn't us, it would be them. Now that's a sad, sad commentary, but that's what he believed at the time. And I think we have to kind of show that, I think we are in the process of showing that that's not true, but we have to be very clear that we're not going to put up with anti-Semitism directed at us, you know, by people that we're trying to stand up for. So it's a very dicey situation. Let me see if I have.
Does anybody have any other questions?
Hey,
Ellen, unmute your mic.
Here we go. What is your last name, Ruth? And do you ever speak to groups about your book?
Yeah, okay. My last name is Rotkowitz, Rotkowitz. And yes, I have been, my book came out April 11th, so it was not the best time to be out launching a book. It was when we were all under lockdown. Normally I would have been going around to bookstores and libraries. But, and in fact, I was scheduled to give several talks for the Phoenix Holocaust Association on the Holocaust by Bullets program, which we were involved with, about Father Dubois, this French Catholic priest who has made it his mission to go all over Eastern Europe and locate the mass graves that people didn't know about, where, you know, Jews were shot and thrown in these, you know, thousands a day sometimes. And he's interviewing the surviving villagers who were there at the time. And it's fascinating. He's written several books about it. And we had a program for that. We were bringing him here in April. I think we had 800 people registered to hear him speak at a Franciscan diocese in Scottsdale. Well, that whole thing had to be postponed. And we're hoping that when this whole thing is over, that we can go back to that. But yes, I have been doing Zoom talks about the book. I'm scheduled to do several more. I did one for the Holocaust Association, and I'm you know, hoping I'll get asked to do more, because clearly that's, I was asked, someone I used to know in New Jersey is involved with Hadassah there. They asked me to do a talk for them. So any organization that would be interested in this, absolutely.
Okay. And do you have a discussion guide in your book?
No, I don't. But if someone wants one, I could come up with one for you.
That would be great, because I lead 2 book groups for Brandeis.
Oh, what? Wonderful. Yes. Well, if you want, in the I could give you my email. I'll say my email, and we could talk. My email is mydeb, M as in maybe, I as in if, D as in dog, E as in evening, B as in boy, mydeb@aol.com. And your name is Ellen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We're trying.
Oh, that's my daughter's name, Deborah. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to reach out to groups that would be interested. You know, I love to tell people about it. It's funny because when I started writing it, I wasn't sure I would feel strongly about it. I just knew I had an image of a character in my mind. And then her problems and her situation grew. And then I became so passionate about it, but it didn't start off that way. So now I just love discussing it and hearing people's reactions.
And you can get it, is it in any of the bookstores, or do you have to go to Amazon?
You can go to Amazon. You can go to barnesandnoble.com, and you can order it at a Barnes & Noble. So far, I don't think it's on the shelf, but they could get it for you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and we're hoping to get it into some libraries as well. I have to work on that. It's hard. And the problem with bookstores, and this was the problem with, you know, this one and the other one, that, you know, it was not had a category, that they fight for shelf space. In other words, the publishing companies have their salespeople who go out there and argue to get their books shelf space. And it's a dog-eat-dog world. And that's why I think in a way it's good that the online booksellers are doing better, because then everybody's equal. It's not like, oh, someone decided this book should be previewed and the other one, we have no room for it. So, you know, it's changing. The business is definitely changing.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And any other comments?
Levi put it on the chat, the link to Amazon.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Great. Yeah, museums, right? We're trying to contact, I'm working with other authors from the Phoenix Holocaust Association. We're trying to come up with places to, you know, contact and, you know, that might be interested. Publications, I had a nice write-up in a local publication called Review, which is circulated on the West Valley where I live. They put me on the cover and they did a write-up inside. And I'm going to be in something else this week from one of the local realtors, has a newsletter. So, you know, we're trying to get that publicity for all our books. We did it, I don't know, some of you might have gone, Phoenix Holocaust Association ran a week-long book session in May, 4 days, one book being discussed each day. I was the only novel. The other 3 wrote memoirs. So each day, one of them spoke about their book, and that got us a tremendous turnout and you know, some great reactions. So that's the kind of thing we're trying to duplicate.
Have you tried Jewish Book Council in Hadassah?
Yes, I joined them because they wouldn't deal with you unless till you join them. I joined. It is an excellent organization. What happened was a friend of mine who's here today is friends with someone who runs a book festival in Naples. And I asked this friend about my book, and she said, we only take books from Jewish Book Council. You have to be a member there. So I joined, and they put out notices about new books all the time. And I sent in an email hoping they'll pick mine. I haven't heard back yet. But there are, you know, there are organizations like that. There's 3G New York. I contacted them. They're going to consider it. I should contact Voices of Hope.
And on Facebook, there's a Jewish Women Read, and they suggest books that they've read.
Yeah, okay. I'm on several Holocaust-related groups in Facebook, and some of them are helpful. You know, people have a need to tell their stories. People are posting stories of their family members or people they know. And it shows that there is this need to get it out there to tell that story. And I think that's why journaling is such a wonderful therapeutic tool, because it helps you get it out there and look at it and say, okay, now what can I make of this? I do strongly believe in writing as therapy, just like art as well. But I think that you know, it is a very important thing to consider.
Thank you.
Elaine, do you have a question? Elaine, do you have a question?
No.
So, Ruth, I have a question for you.
Linda has another one.
Who's your targeted audience for the book?
Hold on.
Who's your targeted audience?
Well, it could be looked at a number of ways because of the different issues I deal with. Because there is a Jewish issue, one could say Jews or survivors of, you know, of traumas. There's also an immigrant audience that I'm finding out that I didn't even realize. I said I have heard from Chinese and Indian readers, so they relate to that. I think it's a woman's story as well, growing up and trying to be independent. I think it is a coming of age story in a lot of ways, which appeals to everybody. It also has a historical element. People who like historical novels that are, you know, they deal with the things that happen in history. So I think there are several targeted audiences other than, you know, Jewish people who know about the Holocaust. As I say, I'm finding out myself, even though I might not have thought of it, that there is that audience out there that relates to it. I heard from someone who is not Jewish, but she was thrilled about the references to New York and to teaching and to being in a high school and to remembering the Iranian hostage crisis. So that was just a kind of a nostalgia thing for her. And then younger people will say, I didn't really know that much about the hostage crisis. That was really interesting to learn about it that way. So I seem to have a lot of audiences there. So I'm hoping that that will translate for me into the book getting around more.
Okay, our far-flung audience, Linda from Chicago.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I wanted to ask you if you caught any flack over the abortion issue, because
I haven't so far. I know that's, I expected to, but I haven't so far.
It was brave.
I thought I would catch flack from her attitude toward the German. You know, the German guy, I mean, she had this attitude that a German is, you know, like a terrible thing because of what he represented. And here, you know, I went to Vienna, I spoke to modern day Austrians, and it was fine. So I expected some blowback from that, and I didn't. Maybe no Germans have read my book yet. But, I mean, it was a true reaction, so I wasn't going to cut it. I think it was a realistic that someone like her would feel that way.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Well, no other questions? Ruth, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Good luck with your book. I hope you have great success.
Thank you.
And, I'll still stay live if anyone wants to chat. I'll stay on till the last person is done. Remember Friday, we have Prescription Matters. Bye, Lee. Bye, Linda. Marcia. Anyone else?
I'll stay. Thank you all for coming.
Your mom was very proud of you.
My mother's there with a friend, Esther and Sherry.
Right.
And two of my New Jersey friends were here, which I appreciate.
Oh, Lee's from New Jersey and Helen.
Helen and Linda.
Welcome.
Lee and Linda, all right.
Where did you live in Vienna? I mean, in New Jersey.
Me? Me?
Both of you. Both
Both of you. Well, we lived near each other, actually. That's where we met. We lived in central Jersey. It was like the borderline of Old Bridge and Mattawan. I don't know, you may have heard of Freehold or East Brunswick. Those, you know, not far from those.
I have friends in East Brunswick.
Okay, yeah, that was about 20 minutes from us. Yeah.
And we went to Vienna also.
Oh, and how was that?
It was a little, it wasn't as weird as being in Germany. I really felt odd in Germany, and my body reacted to it too.
Oh,
no. Helen, I'm glad you said that, because we did a trip in September that started in Hungary, went to Austria, Germany, and Holland, and Germany gave me the creeps.
Yeah.
How interesting that you felt that way strongly. We had never gone to Germany. I always said I wouldn't go. And then we were going to go this summer. My husband convinced me to cruise for our 50th anniversary. Of course, now we are not going. So maybe that was fate that I should never go there. But Austria, for me, it was very interesting because just walking along the streets where our parents had seen their apartment buildings where they had lived, and the temples, which were all, except for one, I think 25 temples had been destroyed by the Nazis. But the Austrians did something interesting, the Viennese. They commissioned an installation artist to create this piece. It looks like a metal pole, and there's like a design on top of the pole that from a distance looks like an abstract design. But when you walk up to it and stand under it and look up, you realize it's a Jewish star. And it's big. It's like a light, you know, size of a light pole. And any place where there had been a synagogue that was destroyed, they put up one of those. So that was, you know, very moving. That was interesting.
I know about 15 years ago, we went on a trip with our synagogue in Maryland to Eastern Europe, and it included, we were supposed to go to Vienna, but they said there was too much anti-Semitism there, so we didn't go there. It wasn't safe. But we went to Berlin, and most of the people on the trip did not want to go to Berlin. And I have to say that it seems that they did a great job of commemorating the horrors that they did during the war. There were a lot of, there were armed guards and everything Jewish, but it seems like they've done a lot to try to erase that image, but we felt very safe there. The Holocaust Museum there's streets where tour guides took us that nobody was unfriendly to us. Everywhere we went, we were treated just like anybody else.
Yeah, well, it became a cosmopolitan center. And
I believe Lauder Foundation from Estee Lauder, they've spent a lot of money in Germany, and especially Berlin, to make Jewish sites available. Yeah,
Vienna too, the Lauders had built up this Jewish community. This was a Chabad there, they had and it's very interesting. I think Germany, compared to like Hungary and Poland, they've come to terms with it. They admit it. I just remember years ago reading Alan Dershowitz's book Chutzpah, and he talked about going to Poland with his son, and of course this was years ago, and a translator. And they went on a Jewish tour, and in the Jewish tour, I think it was of Auschwitz, whatever, they talked about how the Jews were victimized. Then he sent a translator on the Polish tour, and when he came back, he said they never mentioned Jews in the Polish tour. It was all about how the Poles were the victims. So that was really interesting. And now, hopefully, that we don't know if that's changed, but I think Germany's doing better than a lot of the other countries. And
I think that I heard somewhere that Budapest, I've been to as well, the great synagogue there is amazing. Really? But Budapest has more synagogues than any other country in Europe. That's what I heard.
It's another place I've not been to.
Budapest.
Who knows now if I'll ever get there.
Sheldon, you said you went to Berlin.
Yes.
Pinky and I went to Berlin in September, and we went with a mission. Pinky's great-grandparents and grandfather are buried in a Jewish cemetery in the center of Berlin. It's called the Wiesensee Cemetery.
Wow.
The cemetery houses 120,000 Jewish graves. If any one of you saw the movie Unorthodox, there was a scene where they went into the cemetery. That was the cemetery we were in. Oh, wow. The grandparents and great-grandparents are buried there. And it was quite interesting because when you travel Europe, we normally go to Jewish places, and when you get to the cemeteries, they're usually a mess. They desecrated, the gravestones are all over. This particular cemetery, all the tombstones were like perfect. They were in good order. They only have a staff of 12 people that work there to maintain these 120,000 graves. And it's still active as a cemetery. Quite a nice place. And the other thing that we found on our travels to Europe, there were places where we went on guided tours, and I was quite impressed that each and every tour guide that we had actually said Jews were murdered here. They actually, if you think of it in the States, they would never use that word for anything. But they actually say in Europe, Jews were murdered here. And that was kind of a little bit of a redemption, that they accept the fact that there was a Holocaust.
We found that in Vienna, Ruth, right? The president, when we heard the president speak to our group.
Oh, he was so moving. And he apologized.
Full responsibility.
Yeah.
And he said it started even before the Nazis, so he went back even further. I don't know how the people feel, but that's at least a representative of the government.
Yeah, yeah, he was very moving, I remember, and he said that, we know that for many of you, this place is associated with pain, with painful experiences. We hope by being here, you'll, see that we've changed. And yeah, that was very interesting. And I was shocked, really, to hear him say all these things.
Yeah.
And then another thing, we visited a town in Germany called Regensburg, and we had hired a guide. We swore she was Jewish. She was not. But she took us around to all the Jewish centers, and she was instrumental in that part of Germany in a program called Stumbling Stones.
Oh, yes, I know better.
Sidewalks, like 4-inch by 4-inch brass plaques outside houses, and they say, here lived such and such a family, murdered, went to Auschwitz, went to Birkenau, whatever it was. And those are all over, a lot of places in Germany, you see those little stumbling stones that are there.
Yeah, I had heard about that. Also, when we were in Vienna, there's, a Jewish museum and a Jewish, I forgot what it was. It was like a monument with names of the concentration camps, and it looked like books turned backwards. And the area is called Judenplatz, which is Jew Plaza. And I remember my sister saying, can you imagine the United States having a place called Jew Plaza? It just seemed so bizarre, but it's a way of them, I guess, acknowledging what happened. It's right in the middle of a busy area.
They have one in Salzburg, too, a street named
Judenplatz.
Yeah.
Interesting, right?
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very nice. And see you on Friday.
Yes.
Thank you.
Hey, everybody.
Enjoy your days. Thank you.
Last look at my book.
Anything the whale.
Okay. Amazon, Barnes and Noble.